Today we'll be looking at the European front. This is Unit 5, Notes number 5. Next week we will have our last set of notes for this unit, number 6, where we will discuss the Pacific front and we will be wrapping up Unit 5. Operation Torch. Stalin had been pressuring Britain and America to open up a second front in Europe. He wanted Hitler to divert troops from the Soviet front. So Hitler had been invading the Soviet Union. So he wanted America to come in Western Europe to draw Hitler's troops away from the Soviet Union. He wanted some help, some relief. And so he really, really wanted the Allies to go into mainland Europe right away. Instead, Operation Torch was an invasion of Axis-controlled North Africa, and it was announced and commanded by General Dwight D. Eisenhower. In November of 1942, some 107,000 Allied troops landed in Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers in North Africa. By May of 1943, the Allied powers gained control back of northern Africa. And so this helped to give the new American soldiers the experience and the training that they would need before going into Europe. North Africa was considered less highly fortified than mainland Europe, so allowing them to kind of gain that quote unquote on the job experience that they would need later on. The North African Front. So these campaigns helped to provide experience to American soldiers, and you can kind of see the trajectory of how this invasion happened. So Operation Torch began November 8th, 1942, landing in Casablanca, Oran, Algiers, and so they pushed their way through Libya, defeating the German strongholds in that area until the very end when it was controlled by the Allies. From here, they'll pick up their next campaign where they enter into Italy. They go to Sicily, then Italy. And so remember, Italy is under the control of Benito Mussolini. He's allied with Hitler as part of the Axis powers. So let's stop and think. Why did the Allies choose to start the campaign in northern Africa? The main reason they wanted to give these soldiers experience, they felt that they could easily help to win battles, take back territory from the Axis powers. However, when they do this, this very much so offends Stalin because he wanted help in Europe. And so he takes it very, very personal, and it'll lead to distrust later on. The Italian campaign. The Allied leaders agreed that the next target would be Italy. The Italian campaign got off to a good start with the capture of Sicily. As a result, in 1943, the Italian government forced Benito Mussolini to resign and had him arrested. So, this is a kind of turn of events where the Italian people are turning against Mussolini. They're tired of his reign, and he is losing control of Italy. But Hitler does not want to see that happen. So he sends in German troops to help to kind of reinforce the Axis power control of Italy. Hitler was determined to stop the Allies in Italy rather than fight on German soil. The fighting in Italy would continue until 1945. And this is a picture of FDR and Churchill where they met in Casablanca to plan their next move of the Italian campaign. The Allies liberate Europe. Even as the Allies were battling for Italy in 1943, they had begun work on a dramatic plan to invade France and free Western Europe from the Nazis. The task of commanding Operation Overlord would fall to General Dwight D. Eisenhower. So, Operation Overlord was a code word for the eventual invasion known as D-Day. So, in the planning stages, it is known as Operation Overlord. So, Operation Overlord, D-Day, same thing. It's just what is referred to prior in the planning stages, and then D-Day after it happens. The Allies gathered a force of nearly 3 million British, American, and Canadian troops. Eisenhower planned to attack Normandy in northern France. To keep the plan secret, the Allies set up a huge phantom army with its own headquarters and equipment. to basically make it seem like they were going to attack from somewhere else. They even sent fake messages to make the Germans believe that they would attack at Calais, which was 150 miles away. So Hitler bought this, sent a huge army to Calais. So Normandy was still secure, they still had forces there, but the majority of the German forces were at Calais, 150 miles away from the planned attack. The D-Day invasion. The Allied invasion, codename Operation Overlord, was originally set for June 5th, but bad weather forced a delay. Eisenhower gave the go-ahead for D-Day on June 6, 1944, and this was the first day of the invasion. This would be the largest land, sea, and air operation in Army history. Despite the massive air and sea bombardment by the Allies, German retaliation was brutal. It was a hard-fought battle. Despite the heavy casualties, the Allies held the beach. After 7 days of fighting, the Allies held an 80-mile strip of France. So this was huge for the Allies to penetrate into Western Europe and kind of take control of a beach. And so they would use this, and I'll talk about in the next slide, to continue to bring in more troops to kind of continue to try to gain back hold of Europe. So D-Day. So here's a map to kind of show you how the invasion happened. So they came from um, Great Britain. They were stationed to land here in Normandy and these different beaches: Utah Beach, Omaha Beach, Gold Beach, Juno Beach, and Sword Beach. But the diversion was up here. So they made it look like they were going to land at Calais right up here, but they didn't. They landed in Normandy. So within a month, the Allies landed 1 million troops, 567,000 tons of supplies, and 170,000 vehicles in France. So they're just pouring people in. By September of 1944, the Allies had freed France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And so D-Day is really seen as this turning point in the war where now the Allies are having the upper hand. They're pushing forward, they're liberating formerly controlled Nazi areas. The Battle of the Bulge. On October 1944, the Americans captured their first German town, Aachen. Hitler responded with a desperate offensive that would, last gasp offensive that would come to be known as the Battle of the Bulge. He hoped to split the American and British forces, cut them off from supply lines, and basically just try to gain back territory. The battle would last a month and would be remembered as Germany's last stand in the war. So it was the last major offensive that Hitler, the Nazis, the Germans were able to mount. The Germans lost 120,000 troops, 600 tanks, and 1,600 planes in the Battle of the Bulge, and it lasted about a month. Maybe about 6 weeks. I think it lasted until past Christmas. From this point on, the Nazis could do little but retreat back to Germany, and we could see that the war in Europe was slowly coming to an end. Unconditional surrender. By April 25th, 1945, the Soviet army had stormed Berlin. So as the Allies, America, Great Britain, are making their way from the west, the Soviet army is coming in from the east, surrounding Berlin. A few days later, Hitler would write that he blamed the Jews for starting the war and his generals for losing it. He then committed suicide along with his top advisors to avoid surrendering, facing any punishment that he may face for the war and his crimes. General Eisenhower would accept the unconditional surrender of the Third Reich. On May 8, 1945, the Allies celebrated VE Day, Victory in Europe. The war in Europe was finally over, but the war in the Pacific waged on. And we'll talk more about the war in the Pacific next week. So let's stop and think. How were the Allied powers finally able to change the balance of power in Europe? So with D-Day having that success, finally gaining back ground in France allowed them to land more troops, tanks, planes, vehicles to make a move into Western Europe. And that's changing the dynamic. We're also seeing with battles like the Battle of the Bulge how They're able to keep the upper hand. They've now been able to kind of master the wartime strategies of the Nazis, and they're not as effective as they used to be. So we're finally able to adapt and figure out ways to defeat them. So that's the end of the notes. Make sure you go back and do your key terms.